Hello there, welcome to the program Youth and the Road to 2018. My name is Lovejoy Mutogwiza and I'm your host as usual. And today on the program we are paying particular attention to the girl child. And we are paying particular attention not just to the girl child but young girl child, okay? So on the program today we have got Gladys, who is from the Institute for Young Women Development, and she's going to be telling us a cocktail of programs that she has with her organization and what her organization is all about. Gladys, welcome to the program. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me, love. So as you say, I'm Gladys Changachirere and I work with the Institute for Young Women Development, which is an organization that is working to promote the participation of young women and girls in decision-making and political processes. And when we say young women in the Institute, we're looking at young women who are between the ages of 15 to 35, and we are also deliberately targeting young women who are coming from remote communities such as rural areas, farming communities, resettlement areas, mining communities and peri-urban communities. And really our work focuses more around strengthening the young women's capacity to be able to step up and get into the public arena and start contributing and influencing key decisions, be they at a local level or a national level. And then we are also deliberately bridging the gap between young women and existing institutions of leadership and governance, where we bring in people like traditional leaders. We also create dialogue platforms for young women with local councils and also their local parliamentarians, so that they can engage and be able to make them accountable, but also to contribute towards decisions around how those institutions can contribute towards the democratic participation of young women.
All right, I also understand this program is targeting young women from peri-urban and rural areas. Right, why the particular, why paying a particular attention to them? Why and why now?
So for us, let me say that the foundation of the organization in itself has been inspired by the marginalization of young women, especially in those setups. So you realize that due to poor infrastructure such as roads, communication networks, those young women tend to be more marginalized than young women who are in other setups. I acknowledge that all young women are marginalized, especially in decision-making and political processes, but it's even worse for young women in those regions. So we are trying to say, in as much as we're advocating for young women in general, we also need to recognize and appreciate the different realities of young women in those communities, and say, as we embark on this struggle and this journey of promoting young women, let's make sure young women in rural, farming, mining and peri-urban communities are also not left out in that wave.
All right, fine. There have been arguments previously that the society seems to be pushing, especially the young women, into these leadership positions, and they are not ready. But the ones that you have now, can you say they are ready, and what have you done to make sure that they are ready for public office?
I would say that young women, I think, have always been ready to take up leadership, to provide leadership, take up public office, and also even engage in other leadership positions within the civic space. But there are a lot of barriers that have been preventing them to really be effective in those spaces and take up leadership. And what I have seen from this morning with the group of young women that we have from the bulky of the rural provinces in this country today is that young women are really ready. They are quite aware in terms of why they want to take up leadership. They are quite aware in terms of what inspires them to take up that leadership and what change they want to bring about if they get into public office. And so what then remains for me is the fact that we then need to acknowledge the different realities that marginalize them, that make certain spaces inaccessible for them, so that we can then continuously provide opportunities for them to be able to have access, to get information, to be able to connect with other young women all over the country and even beyond, so that they can continuously inspire other young women and make sure that there are as many young women as possible who feel they are ready and prepared to step up into leadership.
All right. It's one thing talking about them being able to run, and it's one thing them running the whole thing. We have had the likes of Manjuru, she's been there, she's been successful. We have had several female parliamentarians, right? These ones that are coming in, what mechanisms have you put in place to make sure that when they hold the positions, they dutifully execute their duties?
So to start with, what we are doing here is we have a transformational leadership program where we are training young women in feminist leadership. And to us, feminist leadership is just acknowledging that there are a lot of challenges that are faced in our communities and also in our country at large. And that young women have a role to play in terms of contributing to solutions for those problems. However, they need to be able to get into positions of leadership, also understanding the dynamics at play that are meant to prevent them to influence as young women. So one thing that we've been doing since morning today really is to talk about how issues around power, body politics, and even the way in which we identify as young women at a very individual level also tends to affect how we participate in the public arena, how sometimes our bodies are used against us when we want to contest for political power. So that's one way of strengthening young women's capacities to be able to get into leadership and make themselves vulnerable in those spaces, knowing that there are challenges, but get them prepared to deal with the challenges. And then secondly, we are proceeding with this training program tomorrow, whereby we are bringing in elderly women, current women politicians, former women politicians, to just get them to share and connect with these young women, but over and above sharing their own experiences and how they navigated those experiences, we are going to partner them so that they can embark on a journey of peer-to-peer mentorship. So they are going to be supporting these young women as they continue to prepare themselves to get into office. And beyond that, we are also hoping that we can be able to create a pool of different women leaders across the societies who can continue to have conversations around how women can be there for each other and start to demystify, especially some of the, fabricated notions around the pull-down syndrome and, the whole negativity around women supporting women and all sorts of things. So we intend to make this an ongoing process and ensure that women continue to interact with those, to engage in conversations and talk about those things that are perceived to be the norms and the beliefs that women are supposed to stand by and not get into leadership.
All right. Let's talk about election and violence. During previous elections, especially the 2008 elections, rural women mostly, they are the ones who were affected by the violence. And now we were seeing this trend that a lot of young women are coming up, and a lot of young men are coming from the rural areas. How can they rise above that notion that violence against them to become successful politicians?
So it really starts with women acknowledging that violence is one of the designs to keep women away from political processes, especially taking up office. And so what we are doing right now is to say, as women, we acknowledge our diversity in terms of our views on different public policies, in terms of our political affiliations, in terms of many other things that they interact with as young women politicians. But that we have a shared concern around structural barriers to women's political participation. So the idea behind this campaign that we are running is to say we want to have as many women from diverse political backgrounds as possible so that they have a united and a collective voice around structural barriers, including political violence, and for them to be able to approach that from a collective point of view and really speak against, advocate, and ensure that we hold existing leaders of existing political leaders accountable to incidences of violence, but over and above, really push that those who commit violence that inhibit women participation are also brought to book. So that's why we are deliberately making this campaign as inclusive as possible, because we know that despite different political backgrounds, women are affected the same way by political violence.
Don't you think maybe it's time that we have sort of a young women coalition that can stand, maybe a young women party or something like that?
Well, I can't deny that I've had women, you know, whispering about a feminist party or a women's political party. But I feel that I think really that's entirely up to especially the women who are running for political office themselves. It's not an agenda that as a civil society organization we can push to say form this political party, but we are there to support them if they realize that their voice is much stronger when they are united and they have their own political formation. But I would say that I think it's not a new phenomenon. We have countries that have got women's political parties that are guided by certain values and principles, and really their agenda is to push for those agendas and ensure that women and perhaps the rest of the citizens are continuously reminded around the ideal principles and values that feminists, for example, stand for. So it's not new, and I think if it comes up, that's one thing that will also be willing to support the young women who become part of that movement.
All right, Zimbabwe is largely a patriarchal society, and what are the, can I say, the socio-economic benefits? Let's not talk about the politics, the political benefits of having especially young women in positions of power.
Socioeconomic benefits. I think one thing that we need to acknowledge is, well, I can't separate this from politics, but I think if we just look basically at how means of production, economic resources are distributed, you can clearly see that they are still distributed, of course, in a very patriarchal way. So getting women to be in leadership positions well, does not guarantee, but is one way to say we want women who are also able to represent other women who understand the women's situation and be able to continuously push towards, you know, equal means of distributing resources and also even facilitating that women have access to natural resources, to different economic resources. So assuming that the women who then eventually get into those public offices maintain their current agenda of wanting to ensure equality in terms of distribution of resources, are able to do that, then I think they can continue to champion that, and that can maybe in the long run see women, you know, benefiting economically from some of these resources. And then socially, I think it also helps to demystify certain notions around women leadership, where women generally are perceived to be those people who can play a subordinate role to men. If women really make it into office, I think that should be testimony enough that women are equal leaders, or can actually be better leaders than men, because we have actually seen women who are even better leaders than men. And I think it also generally helps to shape attitudes and perspectives around what other roles women can have. Because my understanding is somebody who works in the civil society, where I also tend to interact with young women and women who are working in the private sector, is the fact that they are equally as discriminated and marginalized as women in public offices or in civic and political spaces. So I think that general discrimination and marginalization can sort of like wear down gradually across the sectors if women continue to step up and take leadership positions for benefit as well.
All right, great. Let's look at the Constitution of Zimbabwe. It states that anyone below the age of 40 cannot contest to be a president, right? And you are nurturing young ladies. So do they have aspirations to be a president one day, looking at the Constitution?
We're nurturing young women and not young ladies. Young ladies then become very subjective. Well, yeah, that's definitely another barrier. Talking about structural barriers, that age limit in itself sort of like curtails the ambitions and aspirations of young women to dream even bigger. And I think one thing that perhaps we also need to look at is, yes, acknowledge that being in a young woman status is not a perennial position. At some point, they will exit that stage and become the elderly women, and then they can be the president. But I think what's ideal for me is we need not have that limitation around age, because if we look at some of the young women that we have, the vibrancy and the visioning around where they want to take the country to, and what changes they can contribute towards, I think it really deserves to sort of like inspire people to say, you know what?
You look at the likes of Fadzai Mahere, Vimbaya Mushaburi.
We can go on and on about that. Yeah. So we need to be able to deal with such kind of limitations so that society in itself should be accorded a chance to say, I'm running for a young woman for a presidency. So yeah, that's a barrier that is there, and I really feel that it's actually inhibiting the abilities of young women to be able to dream bigger. And that's one thing that needs to be looked into in a new Zimbabwe, because globally, when we also even look at the trends around leadership, we're going beyond young people, young women just being mere voters, but really public office holders and holding, you know, those highest offices of authority. So it should apply. I mean, we are not any different from those countries, especially as a developing nation.
All right, and then we have that women's quota in the parliament, right? Has it done enough to represent the needs and aspirations of the young woman?
I will not talk about the quota having done enough for the needs of the aspirations of young women, but I will talk about the quota as definitely, you know, again on the women's side, in terms of according them the opportunity to be in leadership. And I think that in as much as we just have the quota being there, we are yet to achieve that. We are yet to fulfill you know, what the quota seeks to achieve, because we haven't got to 50-50, for example. And moreover, when you also look at the, you know, young women who are able to be part and parcel of, you know, political leadership positions, we can actually see that there's a very huge gap. It still remains predominantly you're above 40, you know, type of women. So I think there is more that still needs to be done to ensure that that quota is attained, and also that we, as we walk towards attaining that quota system, we are also able to afford young women an opportunity to do that, which makes it quite sad for us as young women to say that when you look at the quota as provided in the Constitution, especially at parliamentary level, you realize that it's limited to 10 years. So this is our last term with that quota. So over and above asking ourselves whether the quota has served the needs of women and young women, I would say that I think it's really a very sad reality, because ideally you would have wanted, we should have the quota stay for a much longer period, because change is a process. It doesn't happen overnight, and really just 2 terms 10 years is
Just
not enough, to have done the necessary work and ensure that we've attained the quota. So one of the things that we'll be interested in pushing for really is to seeing the quota stay for a much longer period.
All right, as we wrap up this session, going to 2018, we are going to for the 2018 elections. What would you want to see done in order to motivate more, especially the marginalized young women, to take up these leadership positions, be it from political parties or from individuals? What would you want to see?
So I think number one for me is an enabling environment. Well, I know when I say enabling, it's really a whole bunch of things that I'm talking about. But I think the most basic things that you would want to see that ensure that young women participate and participate freely is the issue around having a non-violent, intimidation-free, harassment-free environment. So really the appeal is, yes, to political parties and other political actors to say, just desist from this culture of violence, number one. And then secondly, that to our male political counterparts, this issue around using women's borders as a territory for fighting political battles, to us really it doesn't save the nation. So that's one thing the other thing that I would want to see gone, but also to say, I think it's also important that in as much as the society embraces tolerance, political tolerance to each other despite the political affiliations, there should also be just a mere consideration, around the possibility and ability of women leadership. Because I realize many a times when society looks at female candidates, the questions that they start asking are not the same questions that they ask to male politicians. They don't ask about their marital status. They don't ask about whether they have children or not. They don't ask about blah, 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 blah. So if society can also, just allow themselves to be open-minded enough and be tempted to just think about and consider women leadership, I think that is something that could contribute positively towards supporting the young women who are running. And I mean, if other people are to take society seriously, then they can actually be a contribution towards the resources, the financial resources, the economic resources that these young women need to be able to run their campaigns. All right,
I said the last thing, but I'm just looking at this banner. Can you just explain to us what's all this?
Looks sketchy, doesn't it? So the vision of the Institute for Young Women Development is to see a society in which every young woman and girl child has a right of way. And the work that we are doing now, we are raising consciousness to the communities and saying, young women have got a right of way. I mean, we have the same rights as everybody else. And what we need from society is just to accord us those rights. They belong to us, and you should just give them the same way, when you're approaching a traffic robot and you know who has got a right of way. You don't need that person to come and stop you and start fighting with you. You just know, and you let it, let them get their right of way and allow them to pass. So this is what we are saying with the Hey Right of Way, Give Way message. And then as part of this particular project that we are doing right now, today, where we are launching the Young Woman Vote Run Lead campaign, we are saying this cannot be separated from the fact that these young women have got the right to contest, to vote. They have a right to contest for political power, and they've got a right to provide leadership post-elections. So this is what the message is about. All right.
All right, great. That's the program, Youth and the Road to 2018. Way Ahead. Gladys from Institute for Young Women Development. Join me in the next segment where I'll be talking to the several girls who are here, who are taking part in this launch.
For these and other stories, visit our website www.263chat.com. Follow us on Twitter @263chat and like our Facebook page 263chat.